My name is James Trost, and this is A2 Insight. Today's guest is Nicklaus Suino. Welcome to A2 Insight.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here.
Well, we're very glad to have you here. I'd like to start out, as we do with all of our guests, to get a real sense of who you are, where you grew up, your early family influences, interest as a child, coming up in your, let's take us all the way up through your graduate education and how you got from point A to B. So why don't we start out there?
Well, I'll do my best to keep it reasonably short. So I'm an Ann Arbor guy, born in Ann Arbor, and the child of a university professor and an artist. I have an older sister who went through the same school systems that I did. So your Ann Arbor listeners and viewers will appreciate that I went to Mac School, Slauson Junior High, Pioneer High, left, traveled around a little bit, came back, and I then went to University of Michigan for an undergrad degree in English Lit and a master's in fine arts in creative writing.
Well, that's interesting. So after you go back, you grew up, what did you do during this hiatus away from Ann Arbor? You went to your Pioneer High School grad, you're a Pioneer, and then you decided to take off a couple of years. Where did you go?
Well, I had the dream to go to the Wild West, and my sister and I drove out to Seattle, Washington, and I had a cousin who was involved in the lumber industry out there. So I spent some time in the lumber industry, living a very romantic vision of what you do with work boots and chainsaws. And I ended up getting walking pneumonia. And besides treating me, the doctor said, hey, guy, it's time to leave this climate for a while. Went to California, recovered, and ended up back in Ann Arbor.
Well, upon your return to Ann Arbor, is it more academic work? What comes next for you?
So returned to Ann Arbor, went to University of Michigan for my undergrad degree. Did it slowly. I was working my way through college, so it took me 5.5 years to get my bachelor's. But then I met, almost at the end of that period, I met the new chairman of the Masters of Fine Arts in Writing program, Nick Delbenko, and he invited me to apply to the Masters of Fine Arts program, which I did. Got accepted there and spent 2 years at Rackham. Wrote a couple books that in those days never got published, but it was a great experience. And in early 1988, wrapped that up, and thereafter moved to Tokyo.
All right. Well, let's we'll get to Tokyo, but so you're getting a master's in fine arts in creative writing. I guess the question then would be, where did you develop, or why did you do this interest in creative writing? Where did this develop? How did this get started?
You know, it had very early roots. I remember even in elementary school writing short stories, and they were probably absurd. I don't have them now, but I've had an interest in writing all my life. Got to English Lit in undergrad and was a voracious reader and a casual writer. I wrote some poetry and some short stories then. And a few people in the university English department took an interest in what I was doing, and they suggested I might be able to develop that talent.
Well, after you developed that talent, you decided to go to Tokyo.
I did.
What was the interest or the allure of Tokyo as a destination for you?
So that's also the culmination of a long story. As a kid, I was a little guy with a big mouth, and I think some foresight on the part of my parents led them to enroll me in a judo class at the YMCA. And I fell in love with it instantly. So I was 8 years old, started doing judo, did pretty well in the competition circuit as a kid, and I've sort of never looked back. Been doing martial arts pretty much my whole life since then, although I took 4 years off for gymnastics in high school. And in '88, I had been dreaming the whole time about going to the homeland, training, seeing what it's like. So after I wrapped up grad school, I moved to Tokyo and studied martial arts there.
Well, martial arts is a theme that we're going to be developing, that you've developed further as it relates, particularly locally here, in terms of some of the things you've done. Quite amazing. But you studied martial arts, you went to the homeland, as you call it, in Japan to do further study, I assume, in the martial arts that you've been pursuing. But then now you're back again.
Yes.
So now what happens after you return from your tour, your stint in Tokyo?
4 years in Tokyo. Came back. I came back because I was in love with a a woman, and we eventually married, moved to Lansing, and I opened a martial arts school there, and ran that school for 10 years before I sold it.
All right, so now also, at some point, and this is kind of interesting for our audience, I after doing research with you, I found it, you had some bizarre encounter. I assume this must have been during your graduate work or at some point during your study with, of all people, the Unabomber. I don't know for some of our audience to remember this. Ted Kaczynski was the guy's name, but what he was doing for a while was sending these mail bombs to various professors, killed a few people, and unfortunately, at the same time, you have a personal interaction with the Unabomber. Could you expand a little bit upon this encounter in your life?
Sure, I sure can. So that was during grad school. I was a research assistant to a professor named James McConnell, who was a fascinating human being. I call him the second smartest man I've ever met in my life. And he was the author of a best-selling psychology textbook called Understanding Human Behavior. So a big part of my job was helping him collate articles that he would then include as citations in his book. He was very well known, and as it happens, he was a prominent figure at the University of Michigan during part of the time that Ted Kaczynski was at University of Michigan as a grad student in mathematics. And then, for whatever reason, you know, it's hard to decide with people who are insane. But Kaczynski decided that this guy was a problem, along with a few other folks. And one day, while at work, I opened a package addressed to Dr. McConnell, and the package was a mail bomb. So it exploded in my hands, to some detrimental effect, as you might imagine.
Well, detrimental. I mean, again, you're into martial arts. What kind of injuries did you sustain? Are there any long-term consequences from this bomb? I mean, not only the traumatic experience, but any long-term reminders physically of this event?
Other than some very light scarring, I was incredibly lucky. Of course, not lucky to be the guy opening the package, but I was lucky to be at the right place at the right time. So this was early in his career. He was still developing his bomb-making skills. I happen to know about this a lot because I followed it up until then, and then since then. For your viewers who want to know how to make a great pipe bomb, you need to know that you need to put threaded caps on the end to get great 365-degree explosiveness. At that time in his career, he was not doing that. He was just shoving stuff in the end of his pipe bombs. So most of the explosion went up into the ceiling and down into the counter, and thank goodness, not that much into me. So I had some shrapnel wounds. I had gunpowder in my eyes, and I lost some tissue on my arm. But otherwise, I was in relatively good health.
Well, I guess your name is always going to be permanently attached at one level to this event that was finally resolved years later when they caught him. I would just thought what I like to do sometimes is listen to what people say. And you mentioned that the professor was the second most, I guess, knowledgeable or intelligent man you met. Could you then expand upon who is the most intelligent man you met? Because you set yourself up for that.
Right, I did, indeed.
Why?
Well, it's a wonderful question. I have some very dear friends that I grew up with, Gretchen and Allison Holland, and their father was John Holland. He was the first guy to receive a computer science degree from the University of Michigan. And he was deeply into emergent systems, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And absolutely a brilliant human being, friend of my folks when we grew up, so we spent a lot of time around their family as kids. I've reconnected with the daughters as an adult and got to spend a little more time with John before he passed away. John was a brilliant computer scientist, a sterling human being, one of the kindest people I've ever met, a MacArthur Prize winner, and just all around wonderful human being. And so I say he is the smartest man I ever met, partly because I don't understand everything I've read that he wrote, and also because he used to play poker with my mentor, Jim McConnell, and regularly beat him. So who's smarter, right? The guy that wins more at the poker table. That was probably John Holland.
Well, that could be. Well, that sounds like a good testament to folks that are connected with the university and also our Ann Arbor community as well. I'd like to, though, now start to explore a little bit more as it relates to the whole concept of martial arts why the interest in that, why you feel and what you've seen it do for you in your life, and particularly as an owner here locally, we'll get to that, of a martial arts studio, why you find, particularly I guess for younger people or anyone of any age, why you find the development of the martial arts and the various subsets of that an important component not only of your life, but also that could be a component of other people's lives.
Great. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I started martial arts when I was 8 years old at my parents' direction. I fell in love with it, and I've never fallen out of love with it, so that's part of the reason I continue to do it. But the other part is that I've come to see martial arts as the original personal development system, dealing with fear and pain and the threat of injury or death. Forces you to confront certain aspects of life, right? To accept challenges, to become more calm in the face of those challenges. And the wonderful transition I've seen from people over and over again, myself and many of my students, is that we start for a variety of reasons, right? Fitness, self-defense, confidence. And if we stay in martial arts long enough, indeed, it seems to make people more effective, calmer, by and large happier. The folks that have trained with me for years and years and who receive high-level black belts at my school are also human beings who contribute greatly to society. They have great positions, regardless of whether they're academics, business people, whatever they do in life. They're contributors, they're positive, they help others. And I've just seen that pattern of growth over and over again. So we start for a variety of reasons, many of which are childish. We want to win fights or win tournaments. And if we stay in it, we evolve as human beings, and it seems to be a really great methodology to stay in that evolving mindset for your whole life.
Well, you mentioned initially your parents got in because of, I guess, being smaller than your peers.
Mm-hmm.
They felt this might be a good way of self-confidence and in terms of being able to protect yourself to the bigger blokes and the kids at school. Has this, I guess, this ability, this to develop strength in terms of personal defensive capabilities, have you utilized that on occasion as a result of not only your learning, but in terms of encounters you've had as your life, not necessarily at 8, but as an adult or even later in interacting with others?
It's an interesting question. You know, I've competed in martial arts, but in sort of street self-defense, my most notable episode is probably not what you'd expect. So one of the things we learn in judo and aikido is how to roll or how to fall safely, right? So I know how to do a forward roll pretty well, I would say after decades on a reflexive level. And one day, my mother used to live in New York City, and I was walking in the city. I can't remember where I was going, to lunch perhaps, and I was reckless enough to cross against the light. So I crossed during a don't walk, and just for whatever reason didn't notice that there were a bunch of cars bearing down on me. And I don't know what happened. I never thought about it for an instant, but reflexively I did a forward roll onto the sidewalk, so off the street onto the sidewalk, just in time so that the cars went by me, right? Now, it doesn't feel great to do a forward roll on asphalt, but it feels a lot better than getting hit by a car. So I think that's really my primary self-defense moment, was not encountering somebody and fighting with them, but just protecting myself, saving myself from getting hit. No.
Well, that's certainly, that can be helpful, particularly with older people and balance issues and so on. There's
True.
So let's go directly to the development. We had a studio in East Lansing for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you come back once again. I don't know if this is the 4th, 5th, or 6th time you return to the homeland.
Right.
The home community. And then you start another martial arts studio. Could you explain, give us the name and the location, the development, and where you currently are at with your martial arts studio here in Ann Arbor?
Right. So the name of the studio here is Japanese Martial Arts Center. We are on Boardwalk, which is in the shadow of the 777 building, and just a few steps from where we are right now. Many folks who have been around Ann Arbor a long time will remember One-on-One Fitness. It was a huge fitness complex. It was there for 25 years.
I used to play racquetball there until it closed.
Yep, and I trained there very early on. But when that building changed hands, I guess they just couldn't reach an agreement. One-on-One Fitness left, and there was a lot of real estate open in that building, and it was a great opportunity for us. So that's where Japanese Martial Arts Center is. We opened originally where Costco is now, over in the Airport Plaza Warehouse Center. We moved for a while onto Research Park Drive, and now this is what we call Gen 3, our third location. We've been around for 13 years. And the decision to come back to Ann Arbor for that was a very conscious one. I was living in Traverse City, which I absolutely love. Great place to be around the woods, the water. But as I thought about the economy up there and opening another martial arts school, it made a lot of sense to come back here. Ann Arbor's relatively affluent. You have a very diverse population, folks that are interested not just in fitness, but also in other cultural activities. It just made a lot of sense, and I had a huge group of friends here because I had spent so many years here before. So I was able to walk in, open a school with some support from some close friends, and kind of open the door with 20 students, which was a big advantage rather than waiting a year until you had enough folks to pay the rent.
Wonderful. Yeah, in a previous life, I started language schools, so to learn English at various universities, and starting any institution, a new institution with 20 students. Wow, that's amazing.
It was very helpful.
Well, let's go on. I think what's important here, talk about the physical importance of development of youth as well as of any age. But I'm also interested in, we talk about the philosophy of deleting fear and so on, because you studying actually the Japanese culture. I mean, we're familiar with the Chinese culture and their approach to martial arts. It seems to be more of an Asian phenomenon, at least initially in its development. What is it from a philosophical point of view? What did you learn about not only the integration of Japanese martial arts, but something you didn't think that when you got there you learned over the years that you've been there, not just necessarily about Japanese culture and the arts, but something that is unique in that environment?
Well, moving to Tokyo at the age of 28 was life-changing for a variety of reasons. One was I recognized that you couldn't go to stay with another culture and see that they handle so many things in the world differently than we do, and they do just fine. Kind of eye-opening for someone who spent a lot of time in America. We are a little bit US-centric in our thinking here, but in fact there are people all over the world that have great lives, and they just think about the world differently. There's less moral judgment in the Japanese culture. There's more, let's call it stoicism in a way, and the really advanced martial arts teachers that I studied with were incredibly calm human beings. They were able to be just super patient, calm, pursue their path over a long, long period of time, not jump to hasty conclusions about things. And that really helped me transform, I think, from a very young man with some impulsive views to somebody who had a more mature, more patient outlook on life. So it was transformative for me.
Well, and that's amazing, because you've obviously then want to expand that and give that as an opportunity to others.
I do.
Your work. Now, I also now want to kind of shift a little bit too, because I think in addition to the importance of your schools and the Japanese martial arts, your writing career. Anybody who goes to your website is going to be fascinated by the variety of not only your fiction books, but also your motivational. We're going to get to that in terms of how you've integrated all of your life experiences into helping others through various seminars. But I was kind of interested in your fictional career, because you mentioned that you were always interested in writing, but then you starting to hit the writing. It's amazing, and I'm kind of interested in one book called, I think it's called The Drinking Game.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by it, and give me the impetus for this book. This is also, again, you'll learn about possible ways of finding these later, but what was the impetus for this specific novel, and could you give our audience what is the backstory or just the synopsis of this particular book?
Well, The Drinking Game, I don't have a favorite book, but I got to tell you, I really am proud of having written that book. It's about a drinking contest between an older gentleman who has very traditional ways and a young guy who's impulsive and drinks more reckless kinds of alcohol. Obviously, the premise is an absurd one, and it's actually a send-up of a novel by a Japanese novelist called The Master of Go. So that's a short novel about this game. I don't know if you're familiar with the game of Go, but it's sort of an Asian form of chess, and it's about a contest between an older gentleman and a younger gentleman that takes place over a period of months. I was fascinated by the book, and so A, I loved the book. B, I thought it would be humorous to transform it into a drinking contest instead of some austere, serious game of intellect. And it gave me a chance to take a lot of the characteristics of people I respected and loved, my father being the primary one, but also some of my martial arts teachers and some of my university teachers, and kind of mixed them into the personalities of the folks I wrote about. And I actually wrote that book while I lived in Tokyo.
And I guess if it's a compilation of characters, I mean, does have kind of that Asian, the veneration of the older, which we don't necessarily always see in our society, as an older man, a younger man interaction, without giving away the plot of the book. Where does it take place? I mean, how does the development of the drinking game itself? Could you just give us a little bit about how you set up the go with how that is kind of a chess thing? What is the objective of the drinking game between the older and the younger gentlemen?
Well, the objective over time is to win more nights. So they would show up together in a bar and they would start drinking and they would alternate choices. So the old guy is going to be a guy who chooses things like bourbon and beer, and the young guy is going to choose wacky drinks that have sugar in them. I don't even know where to begin, just things that make the older guys sick to their stomach. And they have to drink the other guy's drink, you know, on alternating nights. And the idea is to win the total number of drinks on a given night. Again, it's an absurd premise, but they take it very seriously. And it takes place in bars throughout Ann Arbor and throughout Michigan. I was raised by a guy who loved drinking and loved fishing, so I've spent a lot of time in bars all over this state. And so these bars are featured in different chapters of the book. Yeah.
Well, we also like to promote local authors too, folks, so when you get a chance to look at the variety of work that Dick's done, don't forget his fiction work. But let's move on to the nonfiction aspect of your life, which I think is really kind of interesting too, because in addition to running your studios, the integration of your experiences in Japan and everything else, you also have moved into the whole concept in the area of motivational seminars. And I'm interested in how you got into this additional entrepreneurial endeavors, what the motivation was, and the kind of participants, and how you attract people to your seminars and what they consist of.
Sure. Well, so the latest iteration of what I do to help people outside of the martial arts is called permission. All right? It's the catchphrase is permission to crush the obstacles that stand in your way and to move into a spectacular life. And that's the evolution of my lifetime of pursuit of excellence, fitness excellence, martial arts excellence, health excellence. And when I lived in Traverse City, I worked in a very challenging environment with some folks that created a lot of chaos. And one of the things I did to resolve that was I started following some of the big players in the world of motivation and inspiration. Names people have heard of, like Tony Robbins, Brendan Burchard, Deepak Chopra. And I consumed all the literature I could find. I went to events. And after about a decade of doing that, I realized there was a tremendous amount of overlap between the things that they did to help people become more effective, calmer, happier, and the things that I was already doing in relation to martial arts. So I began to do those in smaller groups, mostly with martial artists, but then in other groups with folks that weren't involved in martial arts, and discovered that some of the things that I have to say and do, some of the systems I can help people learn, are actually helpful. Surprise, surprise. So when I got a lot of positive feedback from folks about what I was doing, it occurred to me that it would make sense to evolve my career in that direction, to help more people, to create larger groups, and that's what Permission's about. I market the heck out of them. I try to fill large rooms. The last one and the next one will be at Weber's Inn, which most Ann Arborites know, and with a lot of people in the room, all of whom are dedicated to bettering themselves and supporting others. It creates a huge amount of positive energy, and it has been really transformative for some of the folks who come.
Well, and that is a major, and we've had several people on the show, locally as well as nationally known authors, talking about just the whole idea of how do people survive, expand, be successful in their careers, getting outside of themselves and seeing the larger picture. So I guess the question would be, you've mentioned some of these other players, the Tony Robbins. I mean, everyone seems to, it's a huge industry, and obviously there's a need because folks are finding voids in their lives and hoping people, we've certainly been able to fill that. What would you say distinguishes your program Permission from, I guess we would call, another option, another potential motivational seminar that's being offered, but why would I want to choose your Permission motivation as opposed to somebody else's?
Well, that's a great question. I think that when you look around in the world of motivation and inspiration, there's a percentage of valid, scientifically supported work that they're doing. there's a percentage of voodoo or BS that they mix in, razzle dazzle, I don't know what you want to call it, and there's a percentage of sales. You know, a lot of those folks want to make a very good living. I don't blame them. I don't begrudge anybody a good living. I think my percentages are different. I've worked very hard to make sure that I'm delivering about 80% science and only 20% voodoo and sales. I don't work very hard to try and sell anything at these. I love doing them. I love helping people. And the older I get, the more I realize that if I can contribute to the lives of others, it comes back to me in some way. Not always financially, but I'm lucky to be in a position where I can put these things on, not worry too much about the money, get a group together, stand up in front and host it. Because I am trying less than many of the major players to make money out of the experience, I think I'm delivering a more authentic, more effective product or service to the folks who attend.
Well, and that you know, I mean, showing up for a group of 500 people to have a lecture when you might have a smaller, more intimate setting where you can actually interact with the speaker might be beneficial. The other thing, I'm just interested in how, given it's such a competitive market, how do you market, or who do you market to for this? Now we know certainly with a Japanese, or with your martial arts, you can do with any ages, a lot of younger kids for a variety of reasons. What type of individual would be interested in a participant of being in your permission seminar? What are the demographics of people who would show up for your seminars?
Well, because people are making, I hope, important life decisions, it has to be adults. They have to be legal adults. I've had people in their early 20s and people in the early 70s attend these. Gender doesn't matter. Culture doesn't matter. What matters really is that they're from one of two groups. Normal folks who want more happiness, more effectiveness, more joy in their lives, and the habitual high performer folks like myself who are always seeking out ways to be healthier, to be more fit, to get more done. I'm an avid consumer of things that make me better at what I do in life, and there are a lot of folks out there like that. Yep.
Well, and then I guess the interesting thing about that too would be with your guests. Could you give an example of someone who's taken, not with a name or anything, but just an example of someone who's come to one of your seminars, has followed your ideas and approach that you have to life, and then they've seen practical results. They've come back and said, "Thank you, Nick. This was the greatest experience of mine." Could you give me an example of someone who was in this situation, which of course is obviously why you continue to do it?
Sure.
Give me some interesting example of a participant and what it's done to their life.
Well, perhaps the most notable example is a lovely young woman who came to my last permission event in March, who was making the transition from one type of job, who wanted to become a life coach, and had more or less made up her mind to do so, but was struggling with some aspects of it, including just her level of commitment and enthusiasm. One of the things we do at Permission is we write down our goals and dreams. Another thing we do is we figure out what the outside stuff is, the external things you have to solve to get there. And then probably the most profound thing we do is we figure out what the inside stuff is. What's in your own way? She committed 100% to the process, left with a master plan and tons of inspiration, and ever since has been a huge proponent of this. She says that it changed her life, that it helped her dial in what she wanted to do it with full commitment and effectiveness, and to experience a lot of joy in the process. I couldn't ask for a better testimonial for what we do, and she's probably the most vociferous of those folks, but I have a stack of testimonials digitally from people who have said in one way or another, being able to do this has helped them focus and get way, way more effective at what they're doing. Yeah.
Well, then let's take it to more of a personal level now as we're nearing the end of our program. What is on the horizon for you in the next few years? We've seen various changes coming back. Are you going to stay in Ann Arbor? Are we going on for another trek? But where would you like to see yourself in terms of your own motivation, shifting in life? What would you like to say that you've accomplished, or the goals you've set personally that you'd like to see achieved in the coming few years?
Well, I own several businesses. I want them to continue to thrive.
And what are those?
So I own the Japanese Martial Arts Center. I own Michigan SEO Group, which is a digital marketing agency. I'm co-owner of that business. I own the entity around Permission. I'm the owner of a small publisher called Master and Fool Publishing. I want all those businesses to continue. Interestingly, in the last 10 years, I don't want that for my own sake, but I want that for the folks that are working in those businesses. I really like seeing them grow into their fullness and move on, so I'm hoping that I can find successors in the next decade or so for those businesses. And I'm going to grow this permission approach to the world. I think that the final evolution, maybe it's not, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but the next evolution of me is to deliver lots of value, to help people live richer, fuller, more joyful lives. And the way I'm going to do that is to create these programs and get better at doing that.
Nicklaus Suino, author, entrepreneur, motivational speaker. I want to thank you very much for being here today on A2 Insight. It's been an honor.
Jim, it's been a real delight. I really appreciate the invite.
Great. Well, thank you. And until next time, for A2 Insight, I'm James Trost.